Hi, welcome everybody to Grand Slam tennis lessons. How to win those big points and then win the matches, and we're talking about the slam. Two things for today. Hope that you get real value, insight in your own training. And also, now when you watch the Men's US Open, you might see or notice things and have greater enjoyment than previously. So we're going to move quickly along, lots to cover. And as you know, there are sort of 6 topics to cover today. We're going to do 5 minutes of setting up the topic and training, and then 5 minutes for your bespoke questions and answers, and then we move on. So the first thing to discuss, and it's the context for all the big point situations, is how to raise your game. And if we first of all understand that even at the last Wimbledon, the Wimbledon commentator said, in all my years of commentating on Wimbledon, nobody's ever satisfactorily explained to me what pressure is, how it quickly comes on, and how it affects people. So in 5 minutes, we're kind of trying to address what everybody talks about and nobody has addressed. And I suspect that if you actually got the big point players like Djokovic and Federer and Murray to one side to say, okay, how do you train? Because you are a raise your game person. You're known to win the big points. That's why you're in the top 4. And you won Grand Slams. How did you train for it? Can you codify it and train other people? They probably wouldn't be able to tell you what the training program would consist of. So let me just, first of all, sort of set the scene as to what happens to your mind and body at big points. So so-called under risk and danger and pressure situations, there's an area in your brain called the hypothalamus, and that automatically sets off. You can't do anything about it. It automatically sets off a series of nerve sequences that go through your brain and body. So you've got all senses wired and ready to fight at your best. And it also kicks off a number of chemical reactions like adrenaline, cortisol, and noradrenaline, giving great oxygenated blood to your muscles and giving you great strength and energy. So all this is flowing through your various systems. And if you don't know what's happening, it will be easy to be overwhelmed and hence underperform. The good news is if you know what's happening, clearly as I just described, your brain and body is given superpowers, so it can fight at its very best when it needs to. So if you can harness these and you have training to harness, then you can raise your game. So those are the 2 distinctions. If you don't know what's going on, it's easy to underwhelm and underperform, and if you do know what's going on, you can kick up. So how do we do that? So we have, in 5 minutes, I'm just going to do 3 key things that will help. And the first thing to say that it is all down to preparation. There is a little important quote that says it's not the will to win that matters. Everyone has that. It's the will to prepare to win that matters, and few people have that. So you can't just walk on court and flick the switch called big point player without having done the necessary preparation. So the first one, I think, and there is a lot of training, but I'm just taking 3 key things that are insightful training and you can put into practice. So the first one, and it comes from setting goals and then a schedule to achieve those goals and the commitment to achieve that schedule. So if you don't have new goals to achieve, it sets everything else in motion. And part of that training then is the use of language. And just by understanding how you put a connotation or language around the words risk, danger, and pressure. Because pressure to an individual, they can turn it into a story and mean different things. So one story might be fear, and another one might be excitement, or anywhere in the continuum between fear and excitement. And you might just think now, under risk and danger and fear, does that excite you or does it fearful? Are you a risk seeker or a risk avoider? And then a natural conclusion of that language is whether you flight or freeze at one end or fight at the other, because you're wired to do one of those two. And evolving flight and freeze a little bit further down comes choker, and evolving fight down is big point player. And those are the opposite ends of the continuum. And you might be anywhere on the continuum. Hence the training, to go from choker to anxious, nervous, to cautiously confident, to excitement and raise my game and kick off. So I think even just by understanding that is already part of the training. And you can put yourself in these situations time and time again, off court, on all sorts of matters as well as on court, and notice the times that you raise your game, do what you think is the impossible, and now you can have evidence to back up your belief that you'll continue to do the impossible and expect to do the impossible. And in the Gladiator training program, both live and online, we simulate this danger and pressure and give people training practices. The second thing, as part of Unused, is to be able to trigger at will being in the zone or in flow. And this is a specialist training in its own right, but you just need to look at, like extreme sports athletes that do extraordinary things, often without training, and they're presented with something right in the moment. And they're the people that have, apart from stretching the envelope of what is possible, they're the people that have been able to hone and train to get into the zone of will. And if you're in battle with adrenaline coursing through your brains, that's also. So just two things, because there are more than two things, but two important things to be able to help you get into the zone. And we know that the zone is when time slows down, the ball looks huge, and you're able to do those complex mathematical calculations and on court, so you can see everything and what's happening in slow-mo. So two things that will help you do that. One is, and it's the kind of the biggest access into the zone, is this thing called risk, danger, and pressure. It is an accelerator. And the second thing is the clarity of thought, the clarity of process that you're about to embark on. So come a big point, whether it's the first, second serve, or other examples, instead of just being at the baseline and saying to yourself, this is the big point, focus, I've got to win the big point, I've got to lose the big point, the clarity of focus is breaking down that point into a sequence of shots, which is where Robert and Thomas will be doing some training shortly, a sequence of shots, and playing those out freeze frame by freeze frame before the point started. Just that clarity of thought does two great things for your brain. So the brain loves narrow focus, and it does two things instantly. One is it gets rid of the future of you being attached to an outcome, what might or might happen. It gets rid of the past, so anything that you're thinking about affecting the shot, and it gets rid of self, it gets rid of the voice in your head. So just that clarity of thought, plus the risk and danger, will enable you to have access to the flow. And now you can trigger yourself and have more energy, see things slower, see the ball bigger, and see the mathematical geometry easier. And you've just got to look at the processes that Sharapova and Federer and others do in those 25 seconds, whether it's bouncing the ball a lot or breathing in, that they are able to trigger this. And the third thing then is to have sequence of shots for different big point situations that Thomas and Robert will do, that you can simulate in practice and run on autopilot without thinking, so you can dictate play. And that's really critically important that you can do that. So those are just three aspects of training, and there are more, but it gives you an insight, I think, into the processes that the elite do prior to the match so that they can trigger it when they have to. So now just think, come the big situation and the pressure's on, you have three choices really. One is you're flooded with these nerves and chemical sequences and you can underperform. If you're a good player and trained, you might play at the same level, but only if you take this unique training and trigger can you raise your game above that level. And now we have the gap between those that narrowly win and narrowly lose, and partly explains why when you see time and time again on the Grand Slams that people are equal, the plucky challenger has been there neck and neck for hours against the winner, but still somehow the winner finds a way to win and the plucky challenger finds a way to lose. So I'm just going to, I think, read a little quote from, at the end of this, I'm going to read a little quote from Agassi, which explains it really well. But for now, I'm just going to hand over to questions, and you'll bespoke questions on this, and the panel to give some answers. Okay, Robert, this might be a question for you as the knowledgeable one. Glucose versus ketamines, and some people have a greater will to win.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question.
So one is about glucose versus ketamines, and that some people have a greater will to win. Taking Sharapova, for example. So how can you train to have a greater will to win?
Well, when it comes to the willingness or the ability to win is something that you do, and you have to learn these things from the time you're a child. Okay, it starts at a very young age. So you start off by first perfecting the strokes, understanding how the strokes are used, and then you want to go ahead and get into a competitive situation so that you're able to use your training that you have used as a child or as a player, and transform those into match situations or game situations. At the end of the day, you're playing tennis the game of tennis is about playing points. One is a winner, one is a loser. It doesn't matter how good your forehand or backhand is. It's can you go ahead and do that into a game situation? Can you put that into a match situation? And these players like Sharapova and so on, they constantly go ahead and work on playing match situations, and not just drilling, but actually putting it into match situations over and over. You heard Federer, one of the things that Federer talked about that has helped him out the most is he's playing more point situation, match situations now than he's ever done before. And you can clearly see that he's much more relaxed in that environment. So getting into game situations is very, very important.
A question about if diet can affect mental performance.
Definitely, diet can affect mental performance. One of the things that we talk about hydration, for example, and that's part of I will include that as part of the diet. Many times, if you're slightly dehydrated, your performance level decreases tremendously. So we need to make sure. We've heard a lot about players using caffeine as a stimuli. We heard about Serena Williams using caffeine to get her game up when she was playing in Australia. She had a long flight and so on. But the other thing we need to really focus on, and you see these cramping situations at the U.S. Open, has to do with very humid conditions and making sure that the players are hydrated. So having proper hydration is extremely important, more so probably than what you're eating, but making sure that you are completely hydrated. And depending on the situation and how the duration of the match, caffeine may affect it. It may be something that is positive in the very beginning, but the longer the match lasts, you want to make sure that you're properly hydrated. Many times, players lose long matches due to the fact that they are not properly hydrated. And I think, Mark, if I'm not mistaken, I think there was in the military services, they strongly suggest and they really emphasize the importance of hydration.
Correct. Nope. So I didn't realize my audio was so poor. In the past, when we've done Grand Slam training sessions, it's been perfect. And I don't actually understand why it's not so good today. So thanks for your tips. And I'm now using the earphone. Forrest also says, does Roger have enough confidence in his larger racket to win a major? Thomas, any ideas on that? Because he's been using his larger racket for a while now.
I think just in terms of his racket skills, I think he has enough confidence. I think it just depends what he feels when he meets Djokovic in the final. So I think based on what I can read lately or this year is that only Djokovic is kind of someone that he doesn't feel very confident about winning against. I think he feels very confident about everyone else, including Murray and including Wawrinka. But for Djokovic, since he's lost 20 times already to him, there is this doubt in him. So I don't think the racket has anything to do with it. I think he trusts the racket now. So the racket is fine. It's just whether he feels that he can overcome Djokovic's defense.
Okay, then I'm just going to answer one question and briefly, and it won't do the question justice, and then we'll get on to the actual big points. So tips on flipping from fear of losing to excitement, will to win and risk. So we're just on the continuum here from fear on one hand and excitement on the other, and various degrees of anxious, nervous, cautious, confident throughout. And the first thing to say, I think, is that word creates world. So the first thing to tell yourself and convert to different language is the story, how pressure is exciting for you rather than pressure is fearful. And you might start looking into your past and find examples of one or the other or anywhere on the continuum. Because that would explain why some people are better at playing not to lose. But the challenge of closing out to win is a skill that needs to be practiced. There's a little phrase that says, on experience, people learn by your losses. But Robert, myself, and Thomas would say, no, you learn by your wins. Only by winning regularly do you get used to the feeling of closing out. And then the second thing is to practice the training of performing at your best under pressure and simulating that. And the third is having these 5 drills honed so you can do it without thinking, as a little phrase, competition builds strength. So we're going to have to, look, we just spent 10 minutes on a subject that I think nobody else has talked about, how the skills and training are. So we're going to have to do that as much justice now and then move on to the points. Thomas, perhaps you could start with the baseline to baseline combat situation and when and how you can disrupt it to go down the line.
Yes, one of the situations in our gladiator training is the hurting down the line shot, which is one of the ways of disrupting the baseline rally, which oftentimes is in a neutral rally. So if it ends up in a neutral rally, and typically that's a cross-court rally, and what we're training for is the down the line shot, which is the most difficult shot in all baseline combinations. So it's much easier, for example, to receive a down the line ball and hit it cross-court than to receive a cross-court ball and hit it down the line. And so, especially at key points, this problem becomes bigger. It's a bigger challenge. And so, one of the things that we train for is the hurting down the line shot, which is kind of a double-edged sword. That's why it has to be trained a lot. Because if the down the line shot is not good enough, then we open up the court to our opponent to stretch us wide with a cross-court shot. And so it's very important that we practice this, that we know how to hit a good down the line shot, that we know that the down the line shot must be a good one, it cannot be an average one, and that we are tactically clear and that we're mentally or emotionally clear when we're doing that. So we have to keep in mind the technical aspect of how do we actually execute that shot, then the tactical aspect, meaning we are anticipating a short ball, we are stepping in, we're taking the ball earlier, we're hitting a good stroke. And then also the mental aspect or the emotional aspect, which is we are confident in our ability, we don't doubt our decision, we don't change our mind, we don't hesitate. And so all these things must be in place. And obviously they are not in place at the beginnings. That's why we need to practice them and investigate which parts of this simple thing that looks very simple thing, okay, I'm going to hit a down the line shot, which of the things that I just mentioned now are not in place yet, and then work and bring them to a higher skill level.
Thomas, just a question, and then we can watch it on the Grand Slam. How can you actually set up the cross court down the line so you can kind of anticipate a shorter shot and take it on the rise? Because just hitting from your hitting zone to your hitting zone isn't going to help.
Yes, ideally you want to stretch your opponent wide so that he opens up the court. So that's with a shorter angle shot, or you want to push him deep behind the baseline with a higher loopier shot, so that, of course, your opponent will have a longer distance to your down the line shot, so that he is in a more difficult situation when he's hitting that down the line shot. So ideally, we want to set up the situation and we try to anticipate when is our opponent going to play a shorter ball. Sometimes, of course, our opponent will defend well and then we'll have to switch to plan B. But our intention is to pull our opponent wide, anticipate a shorter ball, and as soon as we see it, we just execute the plan, the program that we've worked on for a while.
So in the Djokovic-Federer battle, who do you think is better of the cross-court and pressurizing the cross-court to set up an easier down the line? Who's going to win that battle?
The forehand Federer is better, and on the backhand Djokovic is better. He's really good at hitting his down the line shot really parallel to the baseline, to the sideline. So that's why he's number one, because he's so accurate. And that shot, if it's not the winner, it forces a short ball and then he dictates the point again. And so it's very difficult to get him out of that position, out of that dictating position. Whereas on the other hand, Federer can do all sorts of things with his forehand. So I think that's where he has the advantage.
So do you think one of the battles might be Djokovic doing backhand to backhand cross court and then down the line, and Federer trying to do forehand to forehand and then down the line?
Yes, and Federer will very oftentimes, when he is in a backhand cross-court rally, he knows that he is in a slightly weaker position. So he will try and hit not a super hurting down the line backhand, but just a deep neutralizing backhand. He's going to take some chances, and he's going to hit it down the line to Djokovic's forehand, hoping that Djokovic will instinctively go cross-court, hopefully not hit his best cross-court forehand, but slightly less angled forehand, from which Federer can then dictate with his forehand. So that's the cat and mouse game that they keep playing. So they both know what's going on. It's only a matter of execution. Who is going to execute their strategy better today, this evening? That's the whole question.
Great. So we'll take questions from the floor. From Forrest, can anybody learn to have a forehand like Federer? And can anybody learn to have a backhand that is strong, it doesn't break down? And it gets us into a critical question at big points, which is to be able to trust with your life that your shot is not going to break down. So you don't have to think about it mechanically. You can do it intuitively and fluidly. So a technique training question for you, Thomas.
Technically, you can learn a stroke that will resemble any one player's forehand, because you're simply training your body to move in a certain way. So just visually and fairly well biomechanically, yes, you can learn. If you want to model, if you want to copy a forehand that for some reason you think Federer's forehand is the best, then if you do a very detailed video analysis and you record yourself and you do a lot of exercises in front of the mirror, you break down Federer's forehand into small parts, you really, really want to copy his forehand bit by bit, that can be done, of course. Now, that doesn't mean that you can hit a good ball. It just means that you have modeled to move your body in exactly the same way as Federer moves it on a basic stroke. Yes, that is biomechanically the right way, but it doesn't mean that you have internally have the right biomechanics, because that has to be trained physically. It cannot be, just modeled externally. It has to be trained physically with medicine balls, rubber bands, and many, many different exercises. So my answer is it possible to model? Yes, it is possible. You have some YouTube guys that are masters of imitation, and they can fairly well imitate 5 different forehands. So they can show a different forehand, and you can easily recognize whether that's a Nadal forehand or a Murray forehand or a Federer forehand. So if you're really obsessed about a certain technique, a certain style, then yes, you can learn it. But you cannot learn the timing that Federer has, because that has been trained for 20 years and he's an exceptional talent. So that part cannot be learned to the level that he is at.
Robert, over to you. Just a question, which is at competitive amateur club level, do you have any drills or tips how people can learn the angle of deflection and over the higher part of the net and a landing area to aim for, that they can practice this cross court down the line?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the club players lack, that is something that the professionals do, is that we go ahead and we set up drills, and we don't have any competitive situation there. We don't take points. We have players who are rallying back and forth and hitting balls in a specific way, or with a coach feeding balls. You have to go ahead and move from that type of environment into a pressure situation where there are some points going on. So I would have my players as quickly as possible, once we have a pattern, a learned pattern, many of the drills that the hurting forehand that Thomas has talked about, and going and putting that into a point situation, because you're not going to experience this unless you know what it's like to be playing under pressure. Tennis is a game where you play with points, and it's not a game about having the most beautiful forehands and so on. It's about being effective. How can I win the points and so on? So we need to get into a point situation. I will have my players play cross court, open up the down the line shot, and for example, if you successfully do that, the player gets 2 or 3 points depending on targeted areas. So if you hit the ball within the back part of the court, depending, everyone is different. So what is deep for me might be deep for someone else, and depending on the level of play, I will go ahead and reward the player for trying to go into that particular area. Reward the player not just for hitting the ball there, but actually trying to get and hurt the player.
Okay, and two things you said there. One was hurt.
Sorry.
Okay, so two things you said there. One was hurt rather than win a point. And I presume the better the player is, the smaller the target area they're looking to play at.
That's correct. Yes, when you're doing something like that, many times, we try and we hear the point going for a winner. It's something that we really should try to avoid to do. We should really go ahead and hurt the player, because if I go ahead and say I'm going to hit a winner, I'm going to tense up and do something and get out of my comfort zone. I'm going to do something more than I'm willing or able to do at that particular time. But if I go ahead and hit a deep ball and hurt my player, if it is done well, the player is not going to hit the ball back and it will be a winner. But if I, in my mind, say I'm going to hit a winner, I'm more than likely going to try to do something more than I'm comfortable doing. I'm going to hit harder, try to hit the ball deeper, try to do all these things. And under a pressure situation, that may not work.
Particularly under a pressure situation.
That's correct.
Unless you're trained, it probably isn't going to work. And I just want to say that Phil Johnson joined us a while ago, one of the few clinical sports psychologists out of the USA, training Champions League footballers, show jumpers, and tennis players. So, Phil, without making it compulsory, if there's anything from your clinical sports psychology point of view you want to chip in at any point, just raise your hand, and then we can see you want to say something.
Okay. I just to say something about the last point is, first of all, it's a football analogy, and that is when you go to shoot at the goal, if the goalkeeper is standing in front of you, there's a tendency like a magnet to hit the ball to the keeper. When actually what you're looking to do is to hit the ball in the space around the goalkeeper. And listening to Rob here, I'm thinking that, well, one of the things that you're looking to do is to target space. And in a way, the space is psychological as much as it's physical, because you have to see the space in your head. You have to anticipate it and create it. And then you look at the point of the space for the accuracy of your shot. This is, to me, one way that you destabilize your opponent. The other one, of course, is you say to hurt the player is to play the ball much more directly at the player, not just to the side of them, but more to the front of them, where they then have to move in order to be able to cope with the shot. So you're placing them under pressure. So for me, this kind of concept of space sounds so easy, but when you've got 60,000 people looking at you, you've got an open goal, and then you kick it over the bar, and everybody says, why, how? And so it's the same, is that you have to train yourself to look for the space and then to play with it.
Good. There's no such thing as easy, particularly under big points. It's only easy for the people looking on. When you're in the white lines within it, there's no such thing as easy.
Indeed.
I just want to have two technical questions from Forrest and not spend too much time on it because this isn't really a technical training. It's a big point training. And then we'll move on to the second drill. And Thomas, I just want to say, if you look at the chat section, there is somebody that wants, I think is on vacation in Slovenia, wants to know whether 1 week tennis lessons can be arranged with you.
Yes, they can be arranged, yes. I give lessons to all players from 7 to 78, I think, was my oldest student.
The best way of contacting you is to go onto your website?
Yeah, sure.
Or Twitter?
fieldtennis.net.
Okay. So technical question from Forrest. One is watching the ball at contact a myth? And I would say, just for me, it's easily said, but it seems, yeah, anybody. But my answer is, it only seems that the elite hit the ball on contact, and everybody else talks about it, but looks where they're going to hit it. Robert, Thomas?
So my point of view is that you do the best you can to see the ball, but it's not really possible to slow down the ball. I mean, I see it really clearly a little bit in front of my contact. Then as it's coming very close to my racket, I see the blur, but the key is not actually to see the ball. The key is not to move your head. That is the key point, because moving your head changes all sorts of things. It might take you out of balance. It might affect your whole body or your whole biomechanics. So the players are trying to see the ball. I can see the ball. Sometimes I see the blur. I see the ball really clearly before contact. But what I try to do is I try not to move my head as I'm making the contact. So that is maybe the more important question, or a more important answer is that don't try to move your head for that split moment in time and let your arm go faster than your head.
Robert, anything extra to say on that?
I agree with Thomas there. The other thing is, as soon as you're done hitting the ball, a lot of players tend to look up early to see the result and see where the ball is going. I would agree with Thomas that you need to keep your head still and at least make sure that you have hit the ball and you're starting the follow-through before you look up to see where the ball is going. After all, once you've hit the ball and the ball has left the racket, it's just there for a millisecond. By looking up early, you're not going to change anything. You can't all of a sudden magically make the ball go into the court. It's not really going to do anything. But we get in our eagerness to see the result, we move our heads too quickly, resulting in the fact that we actually move the head before we hit the ball and the ball goes out. So it's very important for you to keep your head still before contact and also just after contact, because if you don't do that, you're definitely going to hit the ball long, probably by looking up. It's sort of like you kicking a soccer ball and you're lifting your head up. The ball tends to go up more than if you keep your head down.
Cool. Moving on then. Robert, your specialist subject now. We've just done cross court down the line, and we can watch the little battle going on the Grand Slam, the backhand to backhand and the forehand to forehand. So now we have, taking advantage of that, the approach shot and the so-called easy put-away volley and smash versus the passing shot come the lob. So if you can, just talk through the combat situation between the aggressor and the defender or counter-attacker, and then some training drills. And again, we can look at...
I think the thing that we need to realize is that when someone is approaching the net, we need to make sure that we think of it as approaching the net and the volley. Too many times we have players that are hitting one ball and stopping, and they think that's it. But really and truly, if you really think about it, the approach shot, you're approaching the net, and you're not done with the approach shot until you've actually hit the volley. If you happen to have the player not hit the ball back to you, then that's a success. So in the Grand Slam situation, these players are looking at opportunities to come to the net to shorten off the point. The aggressor has made a point that I'm done with this long rally. I'm ready to go ahead and come up to the net. So they have sort of set the stage that I'm going to be the aggressor. I'm going to hurt my player. But while I'm doing this, I have to think about not just hurting my player, but hurting my players and expecting a volley. Because we see too many times the players, and you will see this many times, players hit a wonderful approach shot, and then they will miss an easy volley. And part of the training that we have to do is that we have to really think about, I'm approaching the net, and as part of the approach shot, it's the first volley. Okay, I have to make that volley. If not, what good is the approach shot? We hardly ever, other than in fixed situations like in doubles, start at the net. We have to come to the net. And coming to the net and the first volley is such an important part of it. With that in mind, like I said a few minutes earlier, we can't overhit the ball. Many times we hit this approach shot and we're trying to hurt the player too much or try to go for more than we need to. I'll say it again. We are approaching the net with the anticipation of hitting a volley. And that is very, very important. You have to expect that. From the passing shot point, the thing that we have to think about is, we want to go ahead and not rush it. Too many times we get into a situation where we're trying to rush the passing shot. We're trying to go for more than we need to. If you reverse the scenario and you have a player who is approaching the net but not expecting or not thinking that it's one shot, if you hit the ball right to them, there is a high chance that they will miss the easy volley. So in the passing shots, sometimes we go for more than we need to. And especially under pressure situations, I'm trying to hit a passing shot and I'm trying to hit it within a very small area, and I'm trying to do more than I need to do. So you need to stay calm and hit the ball into your targeted area, into this space area, like Phil said, and not rush it. Because in the passing shot, again, we tend to speed up the racket head too quickly, framing the racket and doing all kinds of other things. But we need to really make sure that we are not overdoing it, that you have to go ahead, because too many times we feel the pressure that we have to overdo this. Yes, Mark.
Okay, so two things. One is under pressure, if you're still feeling it, the tendency will be to speed up. Your brain will be telling you, finish the point. So I'd like you to answer how under these situations, how can you play relaxed and easy? Because you hear the commentators say, it's amazing, under so much pressure, Federer, Djokovic are playing with so much freedom. How can they do that? And my secondary question is, how come an easy put away volley or smash under these circumstances are anything but easy? Because you see them duff time and time again, even by the elite. So two questions there.
Okay, so the first one is, again, it has to do with the experience that playing under pressure situation and playing points. So as you're practicing something like the approach shot on your own, you want to get into a live situation. We have to remember that tennis is an open game. It's open, anything can happen. So the more we get into an open situation, the better off we are. We want to get into these pattern plays, set plays, but we need to understand that we need to practice open situation with points. So the players Djokovic and Federer and so on have played these over and over many, many times. So I would recommend to the players out there to go ahead and play points, get into point situations in order to handle the pressure. The easy volleys, you see, you've heard of Agassi and you hear of Nadal spending 15, 20 minutes every single practice on the overhead smash. They practice these shots over and over and over. The average club player does not practice these shots over and over and over. They go ahead and during the warm up, and I don't know if they've been working that day or if they when was the last time they played. They get into a game situation and they come and they hit 2 or 3 overheads under no pressure in a warm up situation, and they think that that's going to be sufficient for them to go ahead and hit a ball under pressure. There is not enough practice there. And the same thing with the volley. When they get into a practice situation, they come up to the net, hit a couple of volleys, and that's it. We have to get into these situations where there is pressure so that we can learn from them, because the only way we can do this is to get into pressure situations. We can't get into this environment where we are, feeding balls and everything is in a very organized way. Tennis is far from organized. It's an open, like I said, it's an open situation, open game. Anything can happen. And the more we practice in an open environment with points, with pressure, the better off we're going to be. And, the seemingly easy shots, they're not easy. They're easy for the pros. And sometimes it's not easy for the pros because they themselves sort of take their eye off the ball and do all the things, but they practice these easy shots all the time. But the average player out there does not practice these easy shots. We spend time on the baseline, rallying back and forth, freely without pressure. We come to the net, we hit a couple of volleys, and then we think we're ready for battle. But we're far from that.
Good point, Robert. I'd just like to add that maybe like a little experience that I had. I worked with a group of players about a year and a half ago. And while their technique was good on the overhead, they couldn't finish the stroke. When I took over from the previous coach, I asked them, how much did you work on the overhead, on the smash? And they were kind of like really had to think about it and say, okay, maybe once in 2 weeks. And so, again, it's a little bit deceiving because they were, really good players. They were playing in ITF tournaments, juniors. And so if you feed them a ball, their smash looks really good. And you say, well, it's fine. Let's find a flaw somewhere else. But they were unable to finish the points in a real situation. And so I had a schedule, like I put in a schedule that at least twice a week, we're going to play 1 or 2 games where they are going to have to, win points with the smash. And so it took them at least a month to get them going. And then after 3 months, they were much better. And about in 6 months, they were really deadly with the overhead, which looked exactly the same as 6 months ago. But now they were able to finish the point. And they were not distracted by their opponent moving. They were not pressurized a lot by the score, because they knew they had an experience, they had confidence of hitting a lot of good overheads in practice and in point situations that we designed for them. And so just wanted to throw this one in that, again, from technical standpoint, the stroke might look good, but we need to practice making it work in real situation and practice it quite often, so that we trust it, so that when the ball is flying towards us, there's no doubt, no hesitation, and not changing our minds. Any thoughts on that?
I agree with you. Wholeheartedly there, Thomas. One of the things in tennis, there is a lot of dead time. And during in between points, there's a lot of time. You're actually, when you're playing a match, you're only playing for about 20% of the time. The rest of the time, you're thinking about different things and so on. So there's a lot of time and for you to start to think and doubt yourself and so on. So, these seemingly easy shots, once you go ahead and you miss an easy volley or you miss an overhead, walking back, you have that dead time. And you're telling yourself, I have missed this easy shot. Everyone is looking at me. They have seen me miss this easy shot. And these things could be avoided with good practice in a live situation like your players were able to do. So that really helps them, because missing an easy shot can be the difference between winning and losing, because you get so deflated with this, and it really gets the air out of your balloon.
Yes. Phil, can I get your views on this, on the perhaps on the dead time and also on the so-called easy shot?
Yes, indeed. What you both described in the way I think about this is what I call dress rehearsal. And I use this particularly with dressage riders because it's very much a performance. So they just don't go into the warm-up ring to get ready. They literally dress in the hat and everything to completely create the competition environment. And I think that this is something that coaches can do with their players is not just to kind of create the pressure points, if you like, but to create the whole ambiance so that you then go for set point, you go for match point, you go for serve point, and so on and so forth. And that you talk through the scenario and then you play it. And then it becomes much more real. So that's about creating the circumstances for you to feel under pressure. The second thing is that, and I'm almost thinking of this and demonstrating it in slow motion, is that when you come to make the easy shot, because you've done it before, and because you can see other people having done it before, and almost like the perfect stroke, when you go to hit it, you've already done the shot in your head. It's like you've won the race before you cross the line. And as soon as that happens, by definition, you're no longer in the moment, because you're thinking in the future, you become distracted. And so by the time you go to hit the ball, you're not actually totally focused, and you're certainly not relaxed. And so there's something else that's actually entered your brain, which is a subconscious distractor. It's not something that you're necessarily aware of. And so part of the way that I suggest that you help manage this is through breathing. So that in the preparation from the shot, an in-breath actually interferes with the fight or flight response, the high emotional response on the right-hand side of the brain, and enables the transfer of information to the left side of the brain, where the rational processing takes place, and then they join together in the frontal lobe, in the amygdala, and you get a better decision. So although it sounds simple, the idea of breathing with the flow of the shot actually sends a different message to your brain and to your body, which is much more calming and allows what we call flow to take place.
All right. Thanks a lot, Phil. I see that our guru, Mark, has dropped off. I think he'll be back soon.
Sure.
So I will just introduce our third situation, which we call the first strike situation. And the first strike situation is a combination of the first serve and possibly a forehand. So for most players, the forehand is their bigger shot. And so what we're trying to do with the first strike situation, since we don't possess serves like Raonic or Isner or any of the top 10 players, we actually don't use our first serve to hit a direct point, but we're using our first serve to stretch our opponent, to put our opponent in certain difficulty, and then hopefully receive the ball so that we can immediately start dictating the point with our forehand. So that is the goal of the server, and we call that the first strike situation. So we are thinking, where do I need to serve to my opponent so that I will receive a ball that I can immediately start dictating with the forehand, typically into the open court. On the other hand, we have the returner who wants to do exactly the opposite, namely prevent us from dictating the point with the forehand. So I'll just describe briefly on the deuce side what we can do. So if our opponent doesn't really possess the best forehand in the world, we can actually try and stretch him wide with the forehand, with our serve to his forehand, open up the court, and then hit into that court with our forehand and start dictating the point. Another option is to serve right into the body so that our opponent has to move away and doesn't get a good swing on the ball. And that typically creates a shorter ball, which again we can start dictating, attacking it with our forehand, typically to the open space, and then we go from there. On the ad side, we can actually go for the most comfortable serve, which is out wide, which gives us the most space to hit into, and also to the weaker side of our opponent. But then we will have to practice running around our backhand, because the most usual response from our opponent is a cross-court backhand return, which tends to go to our backhand. So we have to run around our backhand and go for the inside-in forehand and then dictate from there. And you might see this a lot today from Roger Federer, because he will try and hit out wide to Djokovic's backhand and then run around, and you will see him attacking with his forehand from his backhand corner. So on the other side, we have the returner, who is either trying to play the ball really deep and push the server back behind the baseline so that his attacking shots are not really effective, or try and find his backhand. So this is the first strike situation that we work on in the Gladiator tennis training. So maybe over to Robert, maybe just from the point of, I've mentioned a little bit the tactics, but maybe from your point of view, how would you look at tactics in this situation, and also from the mental, emotional standpoint, what might go through their players' heads that you want to work on in these situations? What are the most common mistakes players do, and how would you help them out?
Okay, the first thing is that we need to go ahead and make sure that the player slows down and before they go ahead and start serving, because too many times we have players, once they finish one point, they rush and start the next point. So you need to slow down, get your breathing correctly, visualize where you're going to hit, and so on. The second thing that we have to do, and you're absolutely right, Thomas, is we have to think about the serve as the serve and then the first ball. Because too many times you have players who will just serve and stand around and think that's it. You have to be ready for next ball. So part of the training with the serve, you always have to include serving and quickly get away from the basket and thinking about hitting your next shot. Because it's not just about the serve, it's about the serve and then playing the point. So it's very important that when we practice serves, that we just don't have a basket and we practice hitting balls with a basket. We need to go ahead and practice targets. And once we get the technical part right and hitting the targets, get the basket away from us and have someone on the other side returning balls so that we can go ahead and practice it in a live situation. If you have a player on the other side just standing without even hitting a return, you're going to change the way you serve. If no one is on the other side, you just can serve freely anywhere you want to. But just having someone just stand on the other side in a specific area, you're going to try to either hit towards the player, as Phil said, that's one situation, or try to hit into a space area. So my suggestion is always, once you get the technical part going and understand the tactical part, get into a situation where the opponent or your partner is hitting the ball back and you're expecting that shot, expecting the third shot. The same thing happens with the return of serve. So many times we practice returns of serves, we hit the return, and then we're not expecting the ball to come back. We hit a great return and we think that's it, but you have to go ahead and think about the fact that, the point starts then. The most common mistake servers make is not actually with the serve. It's missing the ball after the serve, the first strike ball. Okay, so you don't see players missing double faults and so on. Commonly, you see people, once they're serving, especially on the second serve, you see them missing the first forehand. Okay, so they're not expecting it. So we have to get into that situation.
Phil, you have any thoughts on this?
Yes. I would draw attention, first of all, to the motivation of the first serve in terms of what people are expecting of themselves. So, for example, I have some players who just want to hit aces, and that the percentage success rate of that isn't so high. And so, first of all, it's about being realistic in doing what you know works, so that has a confidence in itself. And the second thing that comes with that is the decision making. So that when you come to take a penalty kick in a football game in front of 60,000 people, there can be all sorts of distractions. So in placing the ball for 3 seconds minimum is an opportunity when you make your decision where the ball is going to go. You don't look at the goalkeeper's eyes. And then when you go to take your penalty, you keep focused on where the ball is going to go. So if we then transfer that into the tennis serve, then when you're actually doing the bouncing of the ball in your preparation is the equivalent of placing the ball, and that's when you make your decision. You've made your decision on a lot of information about how good your opponent is and so on and so forth, and then you're going to action that shot. And so once you've done that, you're more likely, I think, to be accurate and to be successful. And as Rob was saying, is that you're utilizing that time in preparation to breathe and to actually get yourself ready. And then the next part is about readiness, being sharp, being energized, expecting anything, but anticipating what's likely to happen. And I think that perhaps, I mean, I'm not a tennis coach, but what I observe a lot of is a lack of foot movement. That people can, in the moment, be not frozen, but grounded to the point where they're not moving. And part of the anticipation is the emotional and the psychological mixed with the movement of your body. So that your readiness to move is very much part of your anticipation, and it's a fast reaction time. And so what Rob was saying about then the second receiving of the ball is that, yes, I think I see this too, where players think, oh, yeah, I've made a great shot and that's all I need to do. And then the next thing is the ball comes back over the net and go, hey ho, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And so really, I like the technical, tactical clarity. And in my corner, my four corner, which is my performance corner, I have technical and tactical. I also have communication. And so what I've described, in a sense, is the communication that we have with ourselves of the server is key to the message that you're giving your opponent about your strength and capability. And in the receiving state, showing your readiness and your confidence in the readiness to receive the ball also gives them another message that can then put them under pressure because they see you as being strong. Just in the same way as the football striker looks at the goalkeeper who tries to make himself bigger, and bingo, what do? You just give him the ball.
Yes, good points. I'd just like to add maybe one thing that I noticed many times is that one of the reasons why the players don't move after their serve is because they are observing their serve for a long time. So they're observing where their ball is landing, they're observing the serve. And if you can imagine a situation where, let's say, you're walking on the street and then something happens, maybe people start looking in the sky, they say there's a UFO or something. Whenever we observe something, we want to be very still. And so I see this phenomenon on a tennis court when players start to observe something, okay, what's really going on? And that will automatically makes us very still. And so you have to become aware of this, that you have this desire to observe what's going on with your serve, but that you know that that is actually going to make you very still, very frozen. And so there is no need to observe for so long what is going on with your serve, but rather serve the ball and then immediately look for the ball coming out of your opponent's racket so that you can react to it.
Yeah.
So just a quick point for the players, because we might do this unconsciously, so I'm just making it more conscious that some players might like to observe their serve for a long time, and that's why they miss, because from the moment the ball hits the ground to the moment the opponent hits the return might be just a few tenths of a second. And so if we are sometimes not able to switch our attention so quickly from the point where the ball landed to the point from where the ball is actually coming back to us, which is our opponent's racket. And so I just want to point out that there is this danger of observing your strokes, not necessarily just the serve, but all of your strokes for too long, trying to see what's going to happen. But actually that doesn't matter. What matters is what is going to happen when your opponent hits the ball so that you can react to it. So just something to throw in there.
Can I just come back a moment? As I'm listening to all of this that you're saying to me, I'm going through the action in my head. And what seems to happen sometimes is that as you exhale on the explosion of the physical serve, that in the exhalation, it's almost like, oh, that's done and I'm finished. And what you really need then to be is in the breathing, is in the activation of your brain, in this fight-flight response, in the readiness. So it's when we actually do all of this in slow motion that we notice these kind of things. So I see that, I hear it. It's a great point.
Or I can see it really well. Sometimes I can show to the players if I record them from behind as they play, and they can see really clearly as they hit the stroke, they're kind of freezing and looking after their shot, when actually they could be recovering to their ideal recovering position already. And so this is where we lose tenths of a second. And I know it sounds a little bit, not much, but for a typical recreational tennis ball, the ball flies the whole length of the court in about 1.5 to 2 seconds. So that's how long the ball takes, which means that the ball takes half a second to travel from, let's say, one baseline to the service line, which is about 6 meters. And so a few tenths of a second is actually a few meters on the court of the ball's flight. And if we're losing those tenths of a second with our recovery position or our reaction, we're going to feel that there is very little time when we're on the court, but actually we wasted that time by observing our strokes for too long.
And I think this happens. This happens more with the players that have a big first serve, where they're relying on it and expecting it. You look at a player like Nadal, who spins the ball in. He's actually starting the point by the serve.
Exactly.
Whereas you look at someone, let's say like Raonic, or you look at Kevin Anderson, we saw just recently. Many times you will see them hit a big serve and almost freeze because they're hoping or they're expecting the serve to bail them out or win them the point or what have you. But they're not really as ready for the next shot.
Yes, and Nadal is a perfect example of a first strike player because he's really clever in thinking, where do I need to serve based on my current opponent so that I will very likely receive the ball to my forehand, or at least to the middle of the court where I will run around and attack with the forehand. So he's very clever in figuring out where to serve so that he gets the first ball on his forehand and that he starts dictating the point. So with that said, let's move to the next situation since time flies. And one of the situations that we work on in the gladiator training is the so-called endurance point, which is not exactly a specific pattern of shots, but it happens that here and there, a point develops that becomes longer and longer and longer. And it happens even in Wimbledon or in fast courts, even with players that are servant volleyers, of course, not all the time, but very aggressive players, that here and there will be a point that instead of lasting 5 shots, it's going to last 15 or more. And the reason why we practice the endurance point in the gladiator tennis training is because these points carry a lot of emotional weight, and they can change the momentum of the match. And that's because both players have invested a lot of energy into this point. One of these players is going to lose everything they've invested, and one of the players is going to win everything that they've invested, and they're going to feel this between themselves. And so because these points can be match changers, game changers, we're including them in the gladiator tennis training so that when this point happens, you actually become aware of the gravity of the situation and that you know how to respond. Maybe, Robert, first I will have a question for you. So from your experience, what do you see as a consequence of these points, even though if they don't happen very often? What are the typical consequences of these points when they happen to be longer points? How do they affect the winner, or how do they affect the loser? And is it possible that if we are the losing player, that we're not affected that much? What do we have to do? And if we are the winning player, how do we amplify what we just got?
I think, Thomas, usually these points, for the most part, happen during very critical points, let's say 4-4 or something. So you already are in a pressure situation. So the body is already, you're much more tense. You're feeling the pressure. Your muscles are tighter and so on. So, having a long rally like that can be very, very exhausting. So from that point, like you said, you've invested a lot of time into the point, and for the winner, of course, it is a very, very satisfying situation. But for the loser, you just have to keep going and saying, I have to keep focusing on what I have done. I'm able to keep my rally for a long time. My opponent knows that I can keep the ball in play for a long time. And I have to build on that. I have to build on the fact that I was able to keep the rally going for a long time. I'm sending a message, even if it's 4-4 and I lose the point, I'm sending a message that I'm not quitting. I'm fighting this point. I may have lost this point, but there are a lot of positives out of this, that I was able to maintain a long rally, and maintain a long rally in particular during a pressure situation, because these long rallies happen primarily at the very, very beginning when everyone is starting the match. But more than likely, you will see the situation in very, very close areas like 4-4, 5-5, and so on, where everyone is very, very tense. So you have to look at it as a positive. I'm able to maintain my endurance. I'm also able to maintain my concentration for a very long time. And I have to make sure that I look at that as a positive, because you can easily go ahead and say, oh, I lost this point and that's the end of the world. And with the right mental attitude, even though you lost the point, you can still send a message that, look, I'm in this. You're not winning this match easily. I'm going to make you win this set. I'm not giving it to you. So that's what the players have to do. But too many times we see this and we say, that's the end of it. I've lost it. I can't do this, and so on. And you have to think about the fact that you invested a lot of time and effort in your preparation for this, and you have to look at this as a positive.
And you made your opponent suffer in the process. So even though they won 1 point, they've used a lot of energy to win it.
Absolutely.
And so in the long term, you're grinding them down. So that's another way of looking at it in a positive way.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And too many times, Thomas, we're talking about the long point, but too many times during the end of a first set, we usually think that if I've lost the first set, that's it. You have to think of it as, okay, I'm sending a message that I'm ready to fight and I'm ready to compete in the second set. It may be tough. It may be 4-4. I may have lost this, but I'm sending a message over to my opponent that, hey, I'm ready for the second match, which is the second set, and you're going to have to work hard and you're going to have to maintain this because I'm not giving it to you.
Very good point. Phil, what would you say? What would you share on this as the point is going on? What is going through the minds of the players? How would you?
Okay.
What
I'd like to do is to put this framework to put this action into a framework, and the framework is momentum analysis. And momentum analysis was developed in tennis, and then we adapted it for football.
All right.
And in the momentum analysis, what's happening in this rally is that it could be a game changer. And that the whole essence of the idea of momentum analysis is who has the advantage at any point in time. And so at the point of this endurance rally, whoever has the momentum may well feel that if they win this rally, it speeds up their confidence and their capability of winning. And therefore, the consequence for the loser of the rally is that they mentally may well then believe that their capacity to win the game or the match is actually reduced. But the point that Rob just made, and I think this is really important about the characteristics of the player, is about your determination. And that you may well have lost that rally and you may well be losing the momentum. But the beauty of tennis is that you can change the game in a moment. And so it may well be that you've just lost the endurance rally. But if you then get the next point and then you get a second point, then all the advantages of that momentum success are lost. So the momentum and the endurance is also about placing your opponent under pressure. And I think that you can do this, placing them under pressure without risk and with calculated risk. And that you can then surprise your opponent by doing a shot which you haven't used or utilized properly in the game so far, like a drop shot, for example, and then they go, oh, where did that come from? So although we can see all the demands of the endurance rally, it plays a really important role, I think, in the way that the game moves on and the way that each player perceives their potential success. So as Rob was saying, that you can be really pushed down but if you come back with this determination, but also not with high emotion, but with an emotional intelligence where you're more balanced in the approach, then I think there's a higher capability to recover the situation and then take back the winning momentum.
Yes, and as you mentioned, also one of the dangers for the player who won the point is that they're too happy about it, that they relax too much, and then they're not going to put everything they have into the next point. So it's really important that this player who has won the point is not only thinking about himself, how good he feels about it, but that he understands how crappy his opponent feels right now, and that his intention is now to amplify that feeling as much as possible so that his opponent doesn't recover his confidence. And so your goal is that you're aware of this, what's going on in the mind of your opponent, and that you're now giving everything you have so that you win the second point in a row. And then you're giving it everything you have to win the third point in a row. And that you're not falling into the trap of a letdown where you're too satisfied with that little win that you just made, but that you actually have the end goal in mind, and that you know that your opponent is very dangerous to you when they are relaxed and confident, and that they are way less dangerous to you when they're in a bad mood and frustrated. And so this is, you want to keep them in this mood as long as possible, because then it's going to make your match go much easier. And so I want to point out that in this endurance momentum training that we do in the gladiator tennis training, we have a certain types of scoring. We play different games where we really encourage players to win points in a row, or from the other side, really prevent another player from getting points in a row. Robert, any thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you 100%. You know, we use the term deuce, and it means two. And, you know, when you're in a deuce situation, 40-40, you have to win 2 points in a row. So getting that momentum and understanding winning consecutive points is very important. So, you know, you might have lost or you might have won 1 point, but yes, can you follow it up and win a second one? And as the person who has lost the point, you have to remember your opponent has to try to win a second point. And if I can break that momentum and go ahead and start my consecutive point winning, then I have an advantage. So losing 1 point is a bad thing, but you can fight hard to go ahead and stop it, because the other person has to win 2 points. At 40-40 deuce, you got to win 2 points. So yes, it's very important. So the consecutive point training is very, very important, and is a very, very important tool for players to learn. When you go out and practice winning multiple points, not just hitting 1 point and so on. Try to win consecutive points, because if you're able to do that, you're in a much better position. You don't have to win 4 points. Start off by winning 2 points in a row, because, like I said, at 40-40, extreme pressure points, it's all about winning 2.
Exactly. So maybe I'll just take a look at a few questions. I see a question for Phil, which is, how do we practice breathing skills for key moments?
I think the first thing is to become aware of your breathing. So what happens if you have an emotional history or an emotional memory of things going wrong is that your brain remembers this subconsciously and automatically will train your body to actually respond in a freeze type sensation. So when you're breathing in an aware of this, it actually helps you to control and to move more naturally. So what happens is, under pressure is we either stop breathing momentarily or our breathing becomes very shallow. And that is part of what creates tension in the body. And if you like, is a rigidity within our thinking. So as with the serve that we were describing, is that if you become aware when you're making the serve of your breathing flow in terms of the movement that goes with the serve, just like when you're doing an exercise in the gym, it is about that natural flow. And so if you stop, it just freezes your body. So when you become aware of your breathing, then you can make sure that it's fully integrated naturally into the movements that you're making. And that we're talking now milliseconds as the breath actually is oxygenating your brain, is also allowing the rational side of your brain to interact with the emotional side to get a better decision. The other thing is that we use breathing techniques in so many different things that in daily life. So the breathing isn't just for your tennis. The breathing is for all sorts of things. And so like everything else, it's about practicing it. And so yes, you can breathe in through the mouth and out through the mouth. But actually, if you breathe in through the nose, you're getting greater oxygenation, and it also has greater control. So exercise with it, practice it, and then notice the difference for yourself. So that's very much a beginning. There are a whole range of breathing techniques, but that's how I would begin, and to become aware of what happens to you. And I'm sure Rob and Thomas, as coaches, see players either breathing very, very shallow way or actually stop breathing during some of the actions that they make.
Yes, very good points.
I think we need to go ahead and remember that when we are practicing, we have to remember that we have to practice using what is called deliberate practice. We have to practice with a purpose. So too many times when we go ahead and we are practicing, we have to practice the same breathing as if we do when we're playing a match. Let's say we're doing a serve practice, we just go there and we serve I'll use an example. Let's say, for example, you're bouncing the ball before you're getting ready to serve. In practice, you are not really paying attention to it. You may bounce the ball one time, throw it up and hit it. And then all of a sudden we decide that we're going to do all of this bouncing and breathing and so on in a match situation where we haven't practiced it. It's very important that during each practice that we actually go ahead and when we start by deliberately focusing on what the things that we're going to do in practice, that we can then go ahead and do them in a match situation, because it doesn't make any sense to do practice one way and then go ahead and try to do something else in a match situation, all this, calming down and focusing and so on. It's not really going to work very well if we don't do it in a practice situation. We have to make the practice like a game, like a match, like the matches we're going to play. Otherwise, it's not going to be very effective. So making sure that we use the same number of bounces when we go ahead and practice as we do when we're playing matches. Make sure that we're breathing the same way we do, that we have some familiarity with it.
Yes, so in other words, you're describing a ritual.
Exactly.
Yes, so what we call a ritual is that there's a certain procedure. Of course, the most famous one is Rafael Nadal with all his funny stuff that he does. But that we have a certain procedure that we do before the serve and also before the return. And that we make sure that this ritual and all the things that we do with the same number of bouncing the ball or fixing our shirt or whatever that we do takes exactly the same amount of time. What I remember doing sometimes with a player, I remember having a player on the tournament and I was recording his match. And I actually proved to him with a video editing program that whenever he made a double fault, his ritual, his whole serve routine was slightly shorter than when he wasn't making a double fault or when he wasn't in a pressure situation. And the difference was about 2 or 3 tenths of a second. So his whole time when he was not under pressure and his whole serving ritual from the moment he was starting to tap the ball until the contact was about 5.5 seconds. That's how long it took him to tap the ball, look over, do his service motion and make contact with the ball. And when he made double faults, his whole ritual lasted about 5.2 seconds. And I clearly showed to him that there is a certain rush that's going through his mind that we can actually measure and prove that there's this slight excitement or something else, maybe Phil will find another word for it, that makes him rush a little bit, and that is going to disrupt his rhythm, disrupt his ritual that he has been working on for years in practice session. And now he's doing something different when there's a big point. So maybe Phil, would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, the term that we would use is arousal, over-arousal.
Yes.
Because when we use the word anxiety, we tend to have a very negative response to the word anxiety because we think it's a very negative state. On the contrary, anxiety is the normal fight-flight response that we have. However, when you use the term arousal, it's a physiological response, first of all, releasing hormones into your body for that fight-flight. But equally, it's an emotional response. And so what you're suggesting is that when you don't follow the routine, you don't manage the arousal level. And so then the arousal level lifts and then begins to overload the emotional side of the brain, which then stops the rational part of the brain from making a better decision. When you then add to that the negative self-talk that we create for ourselves, that was a bad serve, mustn't do that again, and so on and so forth, then we distract ourselves from the here and now. And then when we start to make the serve, there is some kind of history of what we've just said, determining the outcome of what it is that we're about to do in terms of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
So there are a whole range of ways in which you can click yourself out of this. And sometimes people tap things and so on and so forth to remind yourself to be back in the moment. And the routine, as you described, is one way of doing that. I have another name called pre-shot routine. Mm-hmm. It's the same kind of thing. And sometimes just doing that routine becomes so normalized and repetitive that it can lose its meaning. And so it's always important to use it to recalibrate. In other words, to put you back to where you started from, where that start point is the foundation for success.
Okay, I have also a little story that I saw many years ago, and it was when I was watching Guillermo Correa when he was still playing. And as I was watching him live at the tournament, and his routine on the serve was that he would always take 3 balls from ball boys and then look at them and then try and select the best 2 and then throw 1 ball back. So I didn't pay any special attention to that. That was just one of the usual routines that players do these days. But then I noticed that when he was facing a break point, he actually asked for 4 balls. And I noticed this pattern that whenever he was facing a break point or a big point, he actually took 4 balls, because that was his method of slowing things down intentionally, so that he had to select 2 balls out of 4 balls, which took him longer time. And that's how he was fighting against this over-arousal and rushing himself. So just something to keep in mind. I'm not sure, sometimes I see Wawrinka do that, but some of you can look at him next time. I think something similar is going on there. But I just want to point out one of the methods that I've noticed once with one player, that he was actually aware that when there's a big point, he might rush things, and he was intentionally using a certain way of slowing things down so that he wouldn't rush, which is taking 1 more ball.
Good example.
Yes. So I see Mark is back with us. So Mark, maybe I hand it over to you. We have one more situation to describe, which is the second serve and battle.
Perfect, thank you. So the second serve, probably the biggest point of the biggest points. So now you are there, it's you're either at 30-40 on a really big point, having missed your first serve, and now it's do or die on the second, or even it's second serve, but you're there to close out. And one question to Phil will be, what's what's more pressure, the second serve to close out or the second serve to save? And then we'll get into some other things about the second serve. So about that one to start with, Phil.
Well, I'm not sure I can scientifically prove this, but my instinct is that the greater pressure is to save it, because the first one is about going for glory, and you can perhaps recover that, but if you actually lose the game, then it's all over. And so I think that that's the one that has the greatest demand, and is the one where, unless it works, you're out of the game. So that one has to work in that sense.
Okay, just let me. I just want to set up the second serve and then pass over to you for the sort of linkage between a penalty and process, and anything from technical side from Thomas and Robert. So for the second serve, and it is do or die, and we're in this situation like we're walking on a plank 30 meters in the air, so it's not easy. What we're trying to do is, first of all, get the ball in. Second of all, neutralize the opponent. And the opponent at the same time is trying to get into a position to be aggressive and take your shot on. And under pressure, unless you have processes to follow, the tendency probably will be to turn your body and shoulders too early because you're anxious. And instead of a kicking serve going high and neutralizing, it now lost nicely into their forehand hitting zone. So, Phil, over to you probably to talk about what is the process and then triggering the process.
Well, intrusion is one of the problems that tennis players are looking to avoid, intrusion being unwanted thoughts. And these unwanted thoughts can then interfere with the preparation for, and therefore the action and the outcome of the second serve. So I just want to deal with this first of all, and that is what's happening with the failure of the first serve. So if you're constantly placing yourself under pressure by having to do a second serve, I think you need to analyze and understand what happens with your first serve to actually avoid the situation as best you can. But secondly, what thoughts are actually coming to you, which are negative in origin, about your serving, which can interfere with your performance of the second serve. On making the second serve, it's also about normally the timeline of the game, but we've already decided on that specific thing. And because of the environment, particularly in professional, but of course, when other people are playing competition, the number of people watching, friends, family, and so on, can actually have a negative as well as a positive influence on the player. So again, it's avoiding these distractions in order to be in the moment. The quality of the performance of the serve is done on the practice court to some degree, and we've already alluded to this with other elements, is that at the beginning I talked about dress rehearsal, and I think this is really crucial for second serve, and building robust confidence in the movements that you're making, in the decision making as to where the ball is going to be placed, and then actioning it with that focus in the here and now. So it's also about, we've touched on this earlier, about translating your performance in practice into competition. And this for many players is the big issue. And I really think that the coaches are impressing here on being able to create this environment for the player to really, really practice this and to really make it then feel as though it's a natural thing to be doing. The breathing we come back to. So if you're not breathing on this critical point, then you're tensioning your body, you're stiffening your movement, you're stiffening your thinking, it's becoming more rigid. So the breathing with the movement is calming and it maintains your flexibility. So these are the elements that I think psychologically and then physiologically that we're looking to think about. And then I can say some things later about the kind of changes that people can make.
Robert, Thomas, anything to add? From a second serve, not being attached to the outcome, playing it as a normal point?
Yes, maybe the point about not being attached to the outcome is understanding that you don't have complete control over the outcome. Since you are swinging at the ball and the ball is going to fly. If you are attached to the outcome, you're going to become more tense. And so, for me personally, and what I teach is that rather than being attached to the outcome of, I don't want to miss or I have to hit this ball in, is to actually try to recall the service motion that works. So when I do my second serve, I just try to do my second serve exactly the same way as I do it in practice. So basically, I'm not looking into the future and I'm not looking especially for the outcome. I do know what I want, but then I just simply focus on doing exactly what I've done so far, because every small discrepancy, every small thing that I do different than usual is going to send the ball in a different trajectory. And so what I want to do is I want to recall the serve that works. And so that helps me detach from the outcome and not think about anything else. And all I focus on is executing the serve, because I'm in a very familiar situation. And that's how the serve is different from a rally point, because when you play any other strokes, the ball is moving and your opponent is trying to move the ball away from you or give you a difficult ball, and you constantly have to adjust. You're never hitting the same ball twice. In fact, we've never hit the same ball twice in our life. But we have hit, and I'm talking about baseline or volleys, but we have hit probably quite a few balls that were exactly at the same distance, moving at exactly the same speed when we were hitting serves. And so serve is something that we're very familiar with. The ball is not moving around much. The courts have exactly the same dimensions, whether in Slovenia or in Florida. And so there's nothing to do except to execute the serve the best you can, knowing that if you do it, you're going to hit the court.
And we've seen examples, both of Federer and Djokovic, of serving doubles at set points when they haven't served doubles throughout the match. So this affects the elite as much as it affects everybody else up.
I just want to say something.
Okay.
Sorry, I just wanted
to
say something very quickly. It goes back to, again, practicing. We as coaches need to emphasize and tell our players that they need to practice second serves. Too many times you go out and you're watching, again, we're talking about players who are getting ready to play a match and they're warming up. You see them hitting first serve, hitting first serve, hitting first serves. But, you have to remember the fact that, you have Boris Becker, you have Serena Williams, and all these great tennis players who spend hours and hours. They spend more time practicing second serves than they do first serves, because they realize that it is a very important point and a very important serve, so that they are very familiar with it. The club player and the recreational player spends a whole lot of time practicing first serves. And these players spend time and time again working on their second serves, hours. So, we have to find, it has to become automatic. So, spending time and working on the second serve and putting ourselves in pressure situations is very, very important. And we are not going to get to the next level unless we do it. I know it's very boring to practice second serves, but it is something that is very, very important, because matches are won and lost based on the second serve.
Very, very good. Just like to draw things to a close now. Just go around the table. So we've looked at the 5 big point situations. First serve, first strike. and what we're trying to do to get the ball onto the forehand. The second serve and return of serve. The baseline to baseline cross court with Federer's backhand to backhand. No, sorry, Djokovic's backhand to backhand and Federer's forehand to forehand. The approach shot, easy put away volleys. Is Federer going to be better at the net? Is that a game changer? And then these endurance game-changing points that both Federer and Djokovic seem extraordinarily excelled at to stop momentum happening. So within those 5 points, looking at Djokovic and Federer, where do you think the match is going to be won and lost, and who's going to end victorious? Robert, first of all.
I think the match is going to actually be won or lost based on the second serve when we get into very tight situations. Okay, it's going to be that both players are going to hold serve. It's going to be into either a tie-break situation or at 5-5, usually those critical moments. And what player is going to fold and and who can hold and withstand the pressure of the second serve. And Djokovic is a very good returner, so there's going to be tremendous amount of pressure on Federer to serve his second serve well under those particular situations. But we also have to remember that Federer also has been very creative with some of his return stands coming in a little bit closer and so on. So there's going to be pressure on Djokovic also to do that. But I think the match will be won and lost on the second serve. And
okay.
I think today overall Federer has been playing very loosely. So I think he will be victorious today.
Okay, well, he's always loose until he comes up against Djokovic, and then he can't be loose. Thomas, what do you think? Where's it going to be won or lost?
I agree with Robert that it's the second serve situation. I would say I'm leaning towards the angle of the return. So I think the match will be won by Federer only if he returns really well on the second serve, because he will want to create pressure. That means taking risks, obviously, and he will have to take bigger risks on his return than Djokovic, because Djokovic's normal return is actually a really good return. Whereas Federer's normal return on the second serve, if he wants to be comfortable, is like a chipped backhand, a slice backhand, that is not going to pressure Djokovic a lot. So he has to go with a drive backhand, with a topspin backhand, where he's not so comfortable. And so I think if he makes a few good ones, and it's down to a chance how he feels today, what the probability is, what the god of tennis will grant to him, as he goes for a down-the-line shot with his backhand return, if he's able to hurt Djokovic there, sneak into the net or at least attack with his forehand, and then get his break, that's where I think the match might turn around. I think that's the key point. I think Djokovic is going to return well as usual, and Federer will have to mix it up his second serve, but he's going to get quite
Phil, any insights?
Down to his feet. So I think it's more about Federer's ability to create pressure immediately at the second serve of Djokovic.
Okay. Phil, any insights from your clinical point of view?
Well, I would like to go back to the momentum issue that we touched on in the endurance rally. And because there's so little between these players, I would say that in the endurance rallies, it's who comes out, the winners of those points consistently will actually give them the edge. And so whilst I understand how the second serve can be the pressure point, if one takes confidence and a relaxation into the performance of the second serve from the benefits of the momentum boost from the endurance rallies, I think that will enable an edge to take place. And in between these two players, the top four, it's just about an edge. And when you have the edge, then you can actually then close it down. And then we can see that on the day, which of them has the resilience to cope with it. That's my take on it.
My take's something slightly different, then we'll bring it to a close. So I would say there were two games going on here. One is the physical and talent game, which if Federer plays the way he can do, he will win the physical and technique and talent game against Djokovic. But then there's the invisible games of mental and the big point player. And in that, I think Djokovic has the edge. And as Becca said after Wimbledon, what I love about my client Djokovic is that when he bleeds is when he steps up to the plate. So unless Federer can overcome him with talent and win in 3 or 4 sets, Djokovic is my man today. So we'll see who's right or wrong. I want to thank my expert panel so much for giving great insights to everybody attending. Everybody that's attended, your questions have been great. It's gone on quite a lot longer than we planned. But I hope you got A, something out of it for yourself, and B, when you watch the US Open now, you'll be seeing the routines and processes and the other games going on, apart from the movement and physical game going on. So thanks, everybody. It's been awesome. Thomas, thank you. Robert, thank you.
Thank you.
And Phil, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.